Okay, so that's enough of the background. So let me take you through some of the initial findings from our research. So firstly, looking at the literature and the evidence from elsewhere, what we already know is that services contribute by far the largest chunk, the largest share of most world economies. Internationally, on average, services now contribute 70% of world GDP and around 20% of world trade. And the situation in SADC is no different. In almost all SADC countries, services would account for most economic activity within the domestic economy. In some countries, more advanced countries like the US and EU, services already account for 50% or more of total exports. What we also know is that the use of services is becoming much more important in the production process. In value-added terms, services embodied in goods, services that are contained in the goods that we consume and reproduce, now account for about 40% of world trade. And this process is generally referred to as servicification. So it's the increase in the production, the sale and the export of services in manufacturing, we call servicification. It's a horrible word, but you'll get used to it over time. Maybe in 5-10 years' time, we won't have an industrialization summit, we'll have a SADC servicification summit, and I expect you to all be there.
Well, you've practiced the word very well, so you know how to say it.
No, thank you, Malcolm. Yeah. And this process of servicification is, oops, sorry. I'm not very good at operating two devices at the same time, so excuse me if I run ahead of you. But this process of servicification is illustrated very neatly in the so-called smile curve. And this is a concept that was first proposed by the managing director of Acer Computers in Taiwan in the 1990s. But it's become much more commonly used over time. And this particular slide comes from the OECD. And what we're trying to show in this two slides is two key trends. Am I able to stand up? No. So the first trend that this slide shows, if you look at the dark blue line, the non-dotted line, is that from a value-added perspective, most of the value added in the manufacturing process now sits at the two ends of the smiling curve. So if you looked at the right-hand side of the smiling curve, you can see the strong contribution made to value added of research and development, design service, and logistics services. If you look at the left-hand side of the smile curve, you'll see the contribution made by after-sales services, marketing services, and logistics services. Very little of the value added now sits in the core production side of manufacturing, which you see there right down at the bottom end of the smile. And so if we look at a company like Huawei, for example, the Chinese manufacturer of cell phones and IT equipment, and the cause of great trouble in the US, 46% of Huawei's employees sit on the right-hand side of the smile curve, are involved in research and development and design. A further 40 to 50% of Huawei's employees are now involved in marketing, management, and logistics on the left-hand side of the smile curve. Just 12%, even better, just 12% of Huawei's employees are actually involved in the manufacturing process. So companies are desperately trying to move up to the top ends of the smile curve. That's where the value sits, that's where the money sits, and countries and companies are looking for ways to get out of manufacturing and into the value-added services side of the smile curve. What the same chart also shows is how the smile curve has changed over time. And so the dotted line that you see is the smile curve in the 1970s. The non-dotted line, this blue line, oh, sorry, they're both blue line, but the other blue line shows the smile curve in the 2000s, and you can see that the smile curve has become much happier, has become much steeper. And so the value added provided by services in manufacturing has become an increasingly important contributor to production globally. And the second trend is illustrated quite neatly by looking at the automotive, the car value chain. And so when Malcolm went to buy a car, 30, 40, when did you buy your first car, Malcolm?
Early 70s.
Yeah, 50 years ago. all he wanted was a car.
Yeah.
And that's all the dealer was selling him. If you go into a dealership now to try and buy an automobile, they're not just going to try and sell you a vehicle. They're going to try and sell you a financial package. They're going to try and sell you an after-sales or maintenance package. They're going to try and sell you a communications package. And so the automobile industry has moved away from just selling cars to selling a wider range of services that you buy that are embodied, that are contained within the vehicle that you purchase. And you can see this in the slide above. And so in 2015, the light blue line, the 45 billion euros in revenue, was accrued from the sale of the vehicle. But that darker blue line, the 13 billion, was what the automobile industry was earning from the sale of financial services in 2015. What you can also see is, according to these projections, and this is work done by Deloitte Consulting, by 2025, it is expected that vehicle sales will still account for the biggest part of the earnings of motor vehicle industry at 62 billion euros. Financial services will still account for a significant chunk at around 17 billion. But an increasing amount of the revenue earned by motor vehicle companies globally by 2025 will come from an additional range of higher value-added data services, car sharing services, riding services, infotainment, subscriptions, advertising, and all sorts of other ways that automobile companies are looking to monetize data and earn additional revenue through the sale of services that are now embodied in motor vehicles. Okay, so that's enough about the rest of the world. Let's focus in and talk a little bit about SADC. The first analysis that we did was to try and understand what is the contribution of the services sector currently to SADC, and specifically to the value chains that SADC is interested in. And so we looked at the social accounting matrices, a framework or data set which explores all of the inputs into economy and how they feed through different sectors and into outputs. And we use this framework to explore the contribution of specific service inputs to the production of specific manufacturing and agricultural outputs. And so what we found that was in some sectors, and so most notably mining, service inputs already account for about half of the total inputs in some countries, and specifically Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, and Zambia. And these inputs include utilities, so energy, water, they include construction and trade services, transport, finance, real estate, etc. Similarly, in agriculture, we found that in some countries, Mozambique, Tanzania, Zambia, again, service inputs into the intermediate production accounted for more than 50% of total intermediate inputs in those countries. And once again, it was largely trade, transport, finance, and real estate. In manufacturing, the contribution of services was a little bit less, but it was still significant across all countries, and around 50% of total intermediate inputs in Mozambique. And that's same trend, or that pattern is shown again in a different way in this spider curve. And so what you can see on the outside there, the orange line, is the contribution of services, all services, to mining inputs across all SADC countries. And you can see it generally hovers between 50 and 60%. The next circle, you can see the green circle is agriculture. And you can see that service inputs account for around 40 to some cases 30% of total inputs in agriculture. And for manufacturing, that smaller red circle, it's a little bit less, around 20% for most SADC countries. Okay. Malcolm, give me back my toy. Thank you. The second piece of analysis that we did was to compare the prices of these key service inputs in SADC countries to the price of similar inputs elsewhere in the world. And so, firstly, we looked at telecoms prices, and it was extremely concerning that in some SADC countries, the price of a bundle of telecommunications and ICT services is about 3 to 4 times the cost of these same services in the 50th most competitive country globally. So there's a problem, certainly among some SADC countries. Likewise, for transport and financial services, it is generally well known that costs are relatively high in SADC compared to more competitive developing countries elsewhere. In construction, we found a different picture. The cost of construction inputs in SADC countries are very low, but they're comparable with construction costs in countries at the same level of economic development. In energy, we found a very mixed picture. Some SADC countries have very low energy costs and some quite high. In fact, if we look at the 80 countries for which data or comparable data was available, one SADC country was the most expensive provider of electricity globally. So now we have a competition. For those of you who are in the previous presentation, the Minister of Trade tried to sell us some goods from the neighboring market, which I've now purchased, and I have a prize for anyone who can tell me who is the most expensive provider of energy services globally, and it's a SADC country. I have a very sweet prize for someone. Is no one interested? We have some high-quality Tanzanian product going to anyone who can tell me who is the most expensive provider of energy services in the world. Put your hand up. No one?
Nobody wants to guess, do they?
I have a very nice prize. Nobody want to guess? We have someone at the back. Yes.
South Africa.
No.
Tanzania.
No. Sorry? Tanzania? No.
No.
No. No.
Are we?
Namibia.
No.
Wow.
I worry, everyone seems very proud to be able to say their own country's name. You shouldn't be proud of this. Sorry, I can't hear the lady at the back.
Zimbabwe.
No. No, I'm getting too many now. Think small.
Maybe.
Mozambique,
Eswatini.
Rwanda.
Eswatini.
Seychelles.
Sorry, I'm not finished. I have some very bad news for you as well. One SADC country was also the most expensive provider of electricity. Sorry, the cheapest. I gave the honey to the wrong person. Sorry. Okay, next question. Which SADC country is the cheapest provider of electricity globally? I have a hand at the back.
Zimbabwe.
No. Zimbabwe does not have electricity. That doesn't make you cheap.
Mozambique.
Anyone?
Tanzania.
I don't hear it. No.
I say Tanzania.
No. No.
Swaziland.
What? Swaziland? No.
Namibia.
Uganda.
Botswana.
No.
Namibia.
No.
Malawi.
No. Close. South Africa is the second cheapest, which is strangely enough.
Zambia.
No.
Botswana.
No. I can't hear. Nobody's going to get lunch today.
DR Congo.
Lesotho.
Who said that?
Mozambique.
Not Mozambique, but I heard something else.
Lesotho.
Yeah, who said that? Whoever said Lesotho, stand up. High quality Tanzanian chili. You'll be very pleased to know we have no more competitions. I have to say, you are very bad at competitions. Okay, so energy we've dealt with. And finally, there's also evidence that there are significant skill shortages in some countries, in some services, and that's especially true of professional and technical services such as ICT, accounting, and engineering. Okay, so the third piece of analysis we did is try and model what the impact would be if we reduced the cost of some of these key service inputs in SADC countries on agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. And so the slide that you see behind me shows what the gain would be in terms of value added for these three sectors if we reduced transport costs by just 5%. And so you can see for some countries and in some sectors, these gains are extremely high. So Eswatini would see a significant improvement in mining profitability or productivity if we reduce transport costs. Likewise in Mozambique, but we also see quite strong gains for South Africa and Zambia in both mining and manufacturing. We see a similar picture if we reduce communication costs by 5%. So once again, Eswatini gets the biggest benefit. And again, it's the mining sector, which is clearly a major user of service inputs. But we also see big gains for manufacturing in Mozambique and South Africa, and also quite strong gains in Zambia and Tanzania. And then finally, we looked at what would happen if we were able to reduce business and finance services by around 5%, the cost of these services. And once more, very strong gains in Eswatini, but interestingly, for business and finance services, we see that the gains are strong across most countries and most sectors. And so all countries and sectors would likely gain if we were able to reduce the cost of finance and business services across SADC economies. Thank you. And the final part of the study was then to visit a number of countries in order to test some of the results from the analysis, but also to ask firms about their own experiences in utilizing services and accessing services in their production processes. So in Eswatini, Malcolm and the team met with a number of agricultural meat and forestry type companies. In Zambia, the team met with metal fabrication and some fast-moving goods type companies. And in Mauritius, we took a bit of a different approach, and we met with a number of service companies that operate across the region to ask them about the kind of problems they encounter in trying to operate across regional borders. And the results are reasonably consistent. So once again, the case studies confirm that all firms do make extensive and increasing use of service inputs in production. And particularly for export industries, as we would expect, transport services and availability of and cost of transport services are extremely important. We also established that in general, ICT, IT, communication, financial services are available across all three of these countries. But talking to businesses, the perception is that the cost of these services is relatively high when compared to competitor countries. And we also identified a number of common barriers to accessing services across all three of these countries. The first was differences in tax rates, and particularly the imposition of withholding taxes in some SADC economies. Although in most cases companies are able to obtain refunds and get these taxes back, delays in accessing these taxes often causes service firms who are selling services across borders to increase or raise their costs in order to offset these types of taxes. The second most prevalent barrier that we ran into was the usual problems in SADC associated with trying to obtain work permits. It's extremely difficult, and particularly for professional and technical workers, to move across borders and work in other SADC economies. And this is particularly problematic where these particular skills are scarce. The third potential barrier that we ran into was a lack of regional standards or mutual recognition agreements for service providers. So accountants or engineers working in one country are often not able to obtain accreditation and work in another SADC country. And again, this inhibits the ability of professionals to work and move across SADC borders. More recently, SADC member countries have begun to implement local content requirements. This is usually done through the government procurement system, and it strongly favors the use of domestic service providers, and so by definition, this is also becoming increased barrier to other SADC providers in operating in neighboring countries. And finally, across all three countries, it was reported that there was, in general, inadequate infrastructure and domestic capacity, skills and people, especially in the IT and telecommunication fields. Okay, so that's our analysis to date and our main findings. And I'll now just talk you through our conclusion and our recommendations. So firstly, what's evident from the available literature, but also the work that we've done through the study, is that services are playing an increasingly important role in the development and integration of industrial value chains, not just in the rest of the world, but also and critically within SADC member states and within the three value chains that have been prioritized. And so services contribute a particularly high share of intermediate inputs and outputs in SADC, especially in mining, to a lesser extent in agriculture, and to a slightly less extent in the manufacturing process. And so it follows that those companies or countries that are not able to access well-priced, efficient, competitive service inputs, either domestically, either from within their own economies, or through trade, by importing those services from across their borders or from third countries, are really going to find it difficult to compete internationally or even regionally in any of these value chains. And so the benefits from services reform, the benefits of increasing access and lowering the cost of key service inputs for SADC economies and for the development of these value chains could be massive. What we found is that in finance and business services, transport services and communication services, their contribution to value chains in SADC is high. Unfortunately, the price of these services in SADC countries is also very high and generally above international benchmarks. And so, through specific reforms that are able to achieve a small reduction in the cost of these key inputs, we might be able to contribute to the deepening and the development, or at least the increased profitability of these value chains. And so flowing from this analysis and from the findings and from everything I presented today, we have drawn 5 main recommendations that we're looking to put forward to you today, and we hope that we can have a discussion around them. Firstly, most of you would be aware that SADC has concluded service negotiations across, is it 5, Malcolm? 6? 6? I should know that. Across 6 priority services. But that leaves another 6 services that have yet to be negotiated. And this includes business services and trade services, retail and wholesale services. So the negotiations in these remaining services need to be prioritized. They need to be taken seriously. And in particular, the evidence from this study suggests that business and trade services should be prioritized in the next round of negotiations. You might also be aware that these negotiations are quite strange and complex. Negotiating services is not like negotiating goods. You can't just cut a tariff. You have to negotiate the specific regulations, laws, and legislation that applies to the entire service sector. And that's done firstly by making commitments in each service sector, listing the specific rules and regulations that apply in that sector, and committing transparently to either keep those laws and regulations in place or ideally to liberalize some of those laws and regulations over time. But it doesn't go beyond those commitments, and in most cases, those commitments do not take us very far. And so SADC has been very innovative during the last round of negotiations. And in addition to asking countries to make commitments, they've also developed a set of sector-specific annexures in which countries commit also to certain regulatory principles. They also commit to harmonizing sector regulation across countries. And in some cases, the intention is that they will also commit to reforming these sectors, to making it easier for companies and countries to trade in these sectors across SADC borders. And so going forward, it will be equally important that in the new sectors that are negotiated, we look to develop similar annexes and we look to make real reforms and real commitments, not just in the main sector protocols, but also through these sector-specific annexes. The third recommendation is that at some stage, SADC needs to give serious consideration to developing a more open regional work permit regime. Many of the problems that we encounter in the services sector arise from the simple reality that it's very difficult for professionals to work in other countries simply because they cannot get work permits. We have all seen from the EAC experience how things can be done differently. And SADC needs to have a change of mindset and needs to think about how do we begin to open up the SADC market to the real movement of people, allowing skilled professionals from SADC countries to work across SADC borders. The fourth recommendation, and I guess that's partly why we're here, is of course more analysis is needed. This report is only touching the surface, but also much deeper consultations are necessary between SADC, between governments and critically with the private sector, to understand what are the specific constraints that manufacturers run into in trying to access good quality services, and what are the specific barriers that service companies encounter in trying to invest or do business elsewhere in SADC. And so deeper and more serious consultations are required, and these need to involve the private sector. And the final recommendation is that in order to inform the negotiations and inform policy and programs in an area, increased cooperation might also be required between SADC states in order to develop the information, the insights, the tools, in order to undertake appropriate trade and industrial policy actions. Thank you very much. I think we are still well on track. It's half an hour until lunchtime, and so we have a good half an hour for discussion. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you for that comprehensive summary of our report. I think you presented that extremely well. I hope that was clear to everybody what we were trying to do. Essentially trying to emphasize how important it is that when you as governments are trying to address the issue of value chains for manufactured goods and agriculture, don't forget the services component. It's a key message that comes from the report, and we want to make sure that we get the recommendations right. So are we able to put the recommendations on the screen while we have this discussion, do you think? Because I think that might be a nice reference if we can do that. Will that be operated from the back room, the technical room, please? Could we put the slide that says recommendations on the screen, please? The last one, the last slide. How do we operate it on this main one as well? Does that come from your machine or not? No, it's from them. Okay, so this is coming. Let me open the floor then to reactions from you all. Who would like to go first? You can ask questions for clarification. You can make comments. You can say that you think that the report is fantastic and that you fully agree with everything that it said. That would be great if you could do that. Also, I'm thinking about what we might include in the declaration. Are there any points which you would like to propose that should be considered for inclusion in the declaration? So, gentleman there, please.
Thank you, Mr. Matthew, for a very good report. And I got contribution and questions about your report. As we have seen from your report on the research results, there are some countries, as a member state of SADC, have high cost on running the social services, and there are some countries that we have seen they have a low cost. Now we can see the potential opportunity for SADC member states to share technology, to share resources, to build our economy as SADC member states. If at all we have this potential market of 350 million people, which is equal to the entire population of the United States of America, so we can see how can we use these results to tap this opportunity we have and to fill this gap that contributes on the use of these social services as an input on those important sectors of agriculture and manufacturing. Now my question is like we have missed the shot. You say the priority sectors and the SADC is already out. Now thinking about including your result in the next round. Oh, I didn't get it clear, or it is like a miss of the shot. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Can we, in traditional manner, can we collect a few questions and comments, and then we can come back and address them as a group? Gentlemen over on this side of the table, this side of the house, please. And then, so this gentleman, then that gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, the chair and the presenter. I'm Roman Maromero, from Malawi, and I coordinate the donor group supporting the private sector development. Two quick comments. The first one is regarding the cost, the service cost on the different value chains. I'm much interested on the finding, one of the graph where you pictured the highest cost in Malawi when it comes to mining. Much as I know Malawi, there isn't much of the mining, but it has reflected as having one of the highest costs. What factors are behind that? What this entails from your analysis? And then secondly, in your recommendations, much as the barriers, you manage to cut across different barriers, but the recommendation seems much tilted towards the technical assistance and professionals. Yet the findings themselves have identified other factors, telecommunication, infrastructure. Why is this tilt? What recommendations can we get if we were to reduce the cost on infrastructure, on telecommunication, rather than just focusing on professionals? Thank you.
Thank you. The other gentleman, please.
Thank you very much for an articulate presentation. I'm from Zimbabwe. You raised a key element in light of servicification of the manufacturing sector. But I'm of the view that if you look within the SADC region, most of the industrialization trajectory is anchored on agriculture. So in that regard, I would have anticipated to hear more on the certification of the agriculture sector as a precursor to even manufacturing and also embedment of more services, since it is the first entry point as a pathway of the people out of poverty. And you would be aware that there are many backward and forward linkages attendant to the agriculture sector. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. One more before we, yeah, please go ahead, Angel.
Yeah, my name is Angel Diaz from Equinoccio. I mean, after seeing the results of the study, is more a reflection on, almost is a question to you. Matthew, was this a surprise, the results of the study? Because it seems to me that it is more, is increasing the competitiveness, is both, I mean, if we may summarize it, is liberalized at country level and at regional level, if we may summarize it. So was this a surprise to you?
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that first round. Please think about questions you might want to raise in another round of the House. But let's answer the question first of all. And I would like to begin with the first question, which we had about whether the countries have missed the boat in terms of trying to take things forward from the study in areas where SADC has already conducted negotiations in the first group of priority sectors. Well, what has happened in the negotiations is that the member states have concluded market access and national treatment negotiations. So market access is about the access by other SADC suppliers coming from other countries into a national market. And national treatment is the way that non-domestic suppliers are treated compared to domestic suppliers. So those two areas, which are traditionally part of trade negotiations, were the main feature of the negotiations. And because of the length of time that has been taken on these sectors, I would say that for the most part, what member states were willing to commit was committed. But I would also say that member states generally felt that they were constrained by the current levels of access represented in their current domestic law, and so the bindings that were offered were generally at the level of the existing regime, existing law, rather than what might be possible in the future. And there were a number of countries that had requests for liberalisation that the member states were not able to either agree to at this stage, or for reasons such as current reforms of existing sectoral law. For example, in Botswana, the banking law is under reform. In South Africa, the transport law was under reform. In Zambia, the insurance law was under reform, and so on. And there were various examples around the region. So we said to the member states, where your requests have not been able to be entertained so far, please keep them on the table, and that we'll look at them in the second round. So in that sense, the boat has not been missed. The other thing I think to say is that what has been negotiated so far has generally been looking traditionally at trade in the services, but not so much with the emphasis or the driver that is provided by industrialization. And so what we want to do through this study is to give member states an opportunity to reflect on whether or not a sufficient job was done in the sectors, or whether there are areas that need to be re-examined in light of what we say about industrialization, in case there are things that need still to be looked at. Because otherwise, if we, as a region, if you as a region ignore the industrialization angle to what has already been done, then in a sense you have missed the boat. So I don't think you've missed the boat. In addition, we need to look at new sectors that have not been addressed, and there the driver is industrialization. We also know that the African continental free trade area is under negotiation, and the same sectors that were looked at in SADC will feature in the CFTA negotiations as well. And now there is not yet an analysis about value chain development across the whole of Africa. So in that sense, the study which we've presented today is pioneering, not just for SADC, but it will also assist SADC member states in terms of looking at their negotiating strategy for the CFTA as well. Matthew, observations on the other points?
Cool. Thanks, Malcolm, and thanks everyone for the really good questions. First, to respond to the question, I don't know if it's from, but certainly about Malawi. And the question was, why are service costs so high in the Malawian mining sector? And I mean, it's a very good question from two perspectives. I mean, firstly, in itself, it's interesting to try and understand why would the contribution of the service sector to mining in Malawi be so important. But it's also important because it raises a question around when we talk about the contribution of services to manufacturing or mining, the level of contribution depends partly on how important that service is. And so in this case, I would assume transport services, for example, might be particularly important in getting any mining produce from Malawi to external markets, particularly being a landlocked country. But it also does raise questions around the cost competitiveness of those services. So if transport costs are extremely high, for example, in Malawi, that is going to raise the contribution of services to that particular sector. So a high contribution of services is not always a good thing, in particular if it's driven by the high cost of that particular service. I don't have the answer as to why in Malawi's case services contribute up to 95%, it looks like, of services, of mining. The data will come from the Malawi SAM, the social accounting matrix. My guess is that the mining sector in Malawi is probably not very big. I'm not sure what is produced, what mineral products are produced in Malawi, and my guess is that what is produced is trucked out, and a large amount of the value added is lost through transport services. But it would certainly be worth exploring, and the same question should apply to all of this data. What this data does is it serves to raise questions around why, for example, in Zambia, do services contribute 60% of overall agricultural inputs, whereas in the case of Lesotho, for example, it's much lower. And part of that might just be a data issue, part of it might be around the structure of the economy, and part of it might be the fact that services in that economy are inefficient or expensive. And this presentation can only ask the questions, it can't unfortunately provide all of those answers. You also ask, why do we focus on technical and professional services and not specifically on, I guess, ICT, infrastructure, financial, other services? We'd put technical and professional out there as a catch-all. The kind of services you're talking about, the IT, the infrastructure, would loosely fall into that technical and professional services bracket. And there could be many more very specific technical and professional services that are in short supply which could be listed. And so again, that's probably an area for further work. We recognize that it's in the higher skill services that we have a problem. I don't think any of us envisage a regime where low-skilled workers can move easily across SADC quite yet. And yes, we probably need to do more work in identifying the very specific sectors or services or skills in which SADC countries might have shortages in some spaces, but excess supply in other spaces, and so trade might help to alleviate those kind of imbalances. There's a question around agriculture and the fact that in many countries, I guess the most obvious gains are likely to come from increasing agricultural production and exports, and certainly that does seem to be the case for many SADC countries. And what's interesting about this study is it simply shows that if you want to be a competitive producer of agricultural produce, and again, this slide shows it, service inputs are extremely important. That access to extension services, financial services, seed technology, other forms of agricultural technology and services are going to be critical for African economies to be able to compete in commercial agriculture. And so I don't think what we presented contradicts that. I think it simply further reinforces the fact that across all of these value chains, the service inputs are equally important. The constraints to these services and the cost of these services also need to be considered, even in primary agricultural production, as an example. And then the last question, Angel, thank you, was did we discover anything that we didn't know already or that we didn't expect to find? And again, that's it's a good and important question. I mean, overall, the results confirm what we would expect. That services are key contributors towards or to industrial performance. That if the cost of services is high, if you reform, if you reduce the costs, if you lower barriers, trade will increase and economies will grow, and the benefits of liberalization will be felt across all of those sectors that make use of these service inputs. And that's not unexpected. But I think what the study did, at least from my perspective, is it did raise some country and sector-specific issues which I might not have thought about. And I guess it raises the same kind of questions which the audience have thrown out today. So for example, I didn't really expect to find that in mining and agriculture, based on the data that we have, that service inputs would be that important. So that, I guess, was surprising to me. It also reveals some quite stark differences between countries which need to be understood. So, we see that, again, to repeat my answer to the previous question, that in some economies and in some sectors, services are more important than others. And that raises interesting questions and, I guess, provides some challenging findings that I wouldn't have thought through without having done this simple analysis. There's also quite a lot more detail in the actual report, firstly in terms of prices, and so the benchmarking study does show quite interesting differences in the cost of services across SADC countries, some of which we expected, like the high cost of energy in Seychelles that nobody seemed to know about. But some of it was quite surprising. The low cost of energy in the SACU countries, even still. The very mixed performance in costs across some of the other services. So there are some interesting insights there. There are also some interesting perceptions that emerge from the case study, so the work that Malcolm did, going to countries and collecting data on what business thought. But we also did send out a survey, a questionnaire, to companies, manufacturing companies in all SADC countries to also collect information on their perception. So around what is the contribution of services in their processes, where do they access services, either domestically or from abroad or from within the region, what are the costs of the services that they purchase relative to competitors, and what are the barriers to services. And so that data, I think, is also at least a little bit new and provides some insights for those countries that did respond to the survey. And I'm sorry to confess, there were only 2 countries that provided meaningful responses, so a lot more work required. So yes, in general, the results confirm what we'd expect, but I think the study does raise some interesting questions and provides some sector and country information which hopefully takes these discussions forward and asks some challenging questions, and certainly helps to demonstrate the importance of services negotiations, services reform, trade in services, not just for the services sector, but also for the growth and development of industrial, agricultural, and mining value chains.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I've got one extra comment to make on the Malawi question about, when any country looks at its data, you're either going to be pleased or feel a bit uncomfortable. I would guess in Malawi's case, looking at the chart that's on the screen at the moment, you think, oh, I don't like that very much, or I want to ask questions about it. But this is why these studies are so useful, because they provide a catalyst for questions to be asked. Once the study is finalized and published, you'll be able to take that away and ask the question. You can take this back to Malawi. You can take it back to who else? Well, you can take it to the governments in Tanzania and say, this study has come out and it's not making us feel happy. What do we need to do about it? I remember when I was working for the British government back in London before I became a consultant, and the Doing Business report that the World Bank produces ranked the UK much, much lower than we had expected. We like to think of us as being a global trading country, and we were ranked, I think, 28th in the world in terms of ease of doing business. And we thought we were much easier than 28th represents. And so the government then said, well, we'll use this study to look into why this perception has come out, where the data has come from, to see whether we agree with it or not. And I think that's reasonable that in your case, in Malawi's case, or in anybody else, you take the study away and probe into it a bit more, because you may find that when you start to lift the stones to see what's underneath, you find things where there's actually things that you could do and should do to change the data for the future. That's the importance of having studies that you can take away and work on, rather than studies that sit on the shelf and gather dust. Another set of questions. Gentleman there in the middle, please, and then after that, one at the back, but the gentleman in the middle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Malcolm and Matthew, for a very good and precise presentation. I have to say I was one of the panelists today, but unfortunately some didn't be able to make it, so we decided to cancel that. I have to say and comment that the study really addresses and really pinpoints the issues that we are facing. I come from the Eastern Africa Grain Council, and I'll share a little bit of the Eastern Africa perspective in terms of what do we see are the key challenges that in the service sector that can limit or can hinder intertrade or regional intertrade. One of the key findings that I've got to gather in the Eastern Africa region is on transportation. And this has been very well commented by Matthew. Currently, 25% of the costs of any pricing of any agricultural commodity that goes into any of the SADC country is included in the price. So for example, if the price is 200 shillings, that means it will turn out to 450 shillings. And this is just because of the transport logistics. So transport, I'd say one of the basic encumbersome or challenge is on the transport, because the transport makes the price uncompetitive in the regional market, but as far as I'm concerned, more in the global market. The other key aspect is on the financing part. Currently, there's just the private sector in Tanzania, in terms of, I'll focus more on agriculture, because as my colleague said, 40% of the global GDP is being contributed by agriculture, and women being included in 43% in the total GDP. When you speak of financing, only 5% is being given to the agriculture sector currently in Tanzania. And this limits a huge lot of we trading our services, but even goods across the borders. Because when you speak of regional integration or regional trade, you speak of massive capital in terms of investing in terms of services, but even goods in financing so that they could cross aboard the border. But the other key issue is on the costs, basically when we are doing trade. For example, the time spent in the borders. A recent study done by the USAID shows that in America and Europe, the time spent in the border to cross our commodities takes around 1 to 2 days. While when you go to Tanzania, as a case study of Tanzania, it takes 7 days, even to 2 weeks, to cross commodities all the way to the other corner angle. So this is one of the key issues which I think needs to be done. But apart from just releasing it, the time that is being spent to processing the documents in terms of permits, Matthew put it very clear, work permits, but there's even export permits. There are even documents like phytosanitary documents and all that. All these take a couple of 3 to 5 to 7 days in Tanzania to get this. And actually now it has been mainstreamed. It used to take even 1 month to have a permit to export all the way to this. So I think these are key things that we need to give a different eye. But just to wind up, I'd like also to speak about the issue of access to predictable policies. Because when you speak of services, policies are being involved. And I think it's high time for the SADC government, the SADC member states, to see on how we can harmonize the issues of predictability and policies so that it could be very cheap to export services, whether it be labor, being financing or communication across the border. And I'll end by speaking about the regional standards. Quality is a very key thing. What has happened currently is that there is a lot of trade that is not going on between amongst the East African. This is a case study which I can share with also SADC. that limits us to have a cross-border trade because we don't have what we call harmonized standards. Currently, there's Eastern Africa harmonized standards, but I doubt if there's Southern Africa development SADC kind of harmonized standards on commodities, on services, and different parts. So I think that it's a high time to have such kind of harmonization so that it becomes very easy for us to trade, even though it's not services, but it could be even goods. So I think these are my major comments today, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very comprehensive, long list of things there. Not all of them related directly to the subject matter of services, but nonetheless important to value chain development. So we should take note of what you've said there, perhaps for the declaration. Gentleman at the back, please.
Hello. Thank you very much for currently panel and all the people who have talked, who have spoke since we arrived in this SADC meeting. I wanted to thank you very much because of our heads of states who have been doing very well to rescue our people from poverty and to make sure that they are well developed, indeed, by using industries. I am the Reverend Kenan Isaiah Joseph Mugaragu from Tanzania. I've been working in England, specifically in Northern Ireland, where I was studying also. I love very much to contribute by saying education is better than everything we are talking. I beg this SADC meeting to make sure that we encourage our states to educate their people, to skill very well those industries experts, to make sure that they are doing very well. It is indeed, if you go to study everything you need to know, you must study it theoretically and physically. I saw this in Belfast when the people were caring for their kettles. They are using very well their industries for fishing, industries for beef, for those meats, industries for machines, those tractors, and so on. So without taking our people to the developed countries, nothing will be done. According to this, I wanted to congratulate Dr. John Pombe Joseph Magufuli, His Excellency President of Republic of Tanzania, for his encouragement. He is doing very well, encouraging people not to turn back, but to keep going forward. And that is how I can congratulate also the SADC heads of states and all the people who are doing very well in this SADC, especially this secretariat. I thank very much United Nations for what they are doing and AU. May God bless you abundantly.
Thank you very much thank you for that intervention. Thank you. Anybody else want to take the floor? Yes, gentleman on the left, and then yes, there's a hand there afterwards. So the gentleman, and then you, please. And did you want the floor as well? Okay, so those three. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. Nitaongea Kiswahili. SADC ni nchi za Afrika ambazo wananchi wote maisha yao yanafanana. Lakini mimi napenda nizungumzie zaidi kwenye swala la kilimo. Kilimo ndio nchi za Afrika inategemea. Lakini kumekuwa na tatizo kubwa hasa kwa mwanamke kwenye swala zima la namna ya umiliki wa ardhi. ili tuende kwenye mfumo mzima na kuepukana na umaskini kwa nchi za Afrika SADC, tunahitaji mabadiliko makubwa sana kuhusiana na kilimo. Hasa kilimo tunachokihitaji kwa sasa hivi kwa nchi za Afrika, mimi nadhani tukitumia zaidi mfumo wa kilimo cha mkataba, Afrika inaweza ikafika mbali. Lakini pili, insurance ambazo ni bima zikiwa zimeingia hapo, zitasapoti zaidi wakulima wadogo katika kuweza kuingia kwenye masoko ya kimataifa na kuweza kuingia katika masuala mazima yanayohusu kilimo cha kimaendeleo. Hivyo tunaomba sisi kama wataalamu wa masuala ya kilimo, kuna wananchi wengi ukienda Zambia wanashughulika na kilimo, lakini bado kilimo chao kinakuwa hakina tija kwa sababu kwamba wanakuwa hawana vigezo vya kuweza kukopesheka hata na mabenki. Ili mtu aweze kukopesheka anahitaji kuwa na document ambayo inamuonyesha kwamba tayari anamiliki ardhi, lakini pili ana mkataba. Kwa hivyo tunachodhani ili tuweze kufikia malengo ya milenia ya kwenda kwenye viwanda na kuweza kukeep market ya SADC na kuweza kuuziana sisi kwa sisi, ambapo bidhaa ya Tanzania itakwenda Malawi, bidhaa ya Malawi itakwenda Kongo, bidhaa ya Kongo itakuja Tanzania. Kwa hiyo tunahitaji kuweza kuona kwamba tusimame zaidi kwenye standard. Standard ndio jambo la msingi kama wenzangu walivyotangulia kusema. Lakini huyu mtu mwenye hali ya chini anawezaje kuweza kupata certification ambayo inampeleka kwenye viwango vya kimataifa, hususani mjasiriamali ambaye ni mama na vijana. Kwa hiyo tuna nafasi kubwa zaidi kama sisi, huo utafiti wenu ukiingia kwenye mfumo huo na ukaboreshwa zaidi, tunaamini kwamba nchi za Afrika zinaweza zikazalisha mazao aina mbalimbali na kuweza kufanya production ambazo tutauziana sisi kwa sisi, ikiwemo karanga, alizeti, mahindi, mpunga. Mfano, tunapoteza vitu vingi sana katika mahindi. Punje moja ya mahindi ina uwezo wa kutoa mafuta ya kupikia 7% mpaka 9%. Changamoto tunayopungukiwa sisi ni teknolojia. Wenzetu walioko huko mbele waliotuzidi wana teknolojia kubwa. Punje moja ya mahindi inaweza ikazalisha hayo mafuta 7% mpaka 9%. Sasa ukiangalia tuna punje ngapi katika tani 100,000? Tutakuwa tumekusanya mafuta kiwango gani? Kwa hiyo tuna nafasi kubwa zaidi ya kuweza kwanza tumkwamue. Lazima tunapotaka kuzungumzia uchumi unataka kuchukua uchumi wa nini? Tunazungumzia small holder ambao wajasiriamali wadogo wa kwenye kilimo, na ndio jopo kubwa lenye watu maskini. Kwa hiyo tunaona kwamba research ambayo mlioifanya nyinyi wenzetu, mkiingia zaidi ndani kumwezesha mwanamke kwanza aweze kumiliki ardhi, lakini pili kijana ambaye ndio tegemeo katika Afrika nzima na yeye aweze kumiliki ardhi. Sasa tunaposema kwamba tuna upungufu wa tatizo la ajira, tayari huyu kijana tunaweza kumtoa kwenye mfumo ambao alikuwa anataka kuwa tegemezi kwenda kuajiriwa kwenye viwanda ambavyo tayari vimeshaandaliwa na watu. Kumbe hata yeye ana nafasi ya kuandaa kiwanda chake. Kwa hiyo mimi ninachoomba zaidi, ninyi kama wadau wakuu ambao mmekaa kwenye meza, je, ni mkakati gani ambao mliokuja nao wa kumwezesha mwanamke kuweza kupata umiliki wa ardhi kwa nchi kwa SADC? Lakini ni mkakati gani ambao mmekuja nao wa kumwezesha kijana katika kuweza kupata mitaji ya kuweza kuingia katika soko zima la Afrika ambako ni SADC, ili aweze kununua mazao, aweze kufanya production ambayo itakuwa imekizi viwango vya kimataifa ikiwemo ISO, kwa sababu sasa hivi tunatumia mitambo iliyopitwa na wakati. Tunatumia local machine ambayo ni hama. Kiafya bado na yenyewe ni tatizo, kwa sababu ukichukua huu unga tunaotumia sasa hivi, ukiambiwa unaweza ukasema situmii tena ugali. Ugali tunaokula una parts za chuma. Kwa hiyo tunashindwa kumove kama Tanzania kupeleka bidhaa zetu especially unga, kwa sababu zinatumia local machine. tunahitaji changes za grinding milling machine liner. Tunazipateje kama vijana? Kwa hiyo tunataka kuona kwamba nyinyi kama hapo wataalamu mnaweza kufanya research, mkiviingiza hivyo vitu na mkaja na mkakati ambao unaweza kutusupport kama SADC. Sisi kama vijana tutashukuru sana. Asanteni sana.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Important points that you've raised there. We'll come back to that in our response. The lady here, please, and then the gentleman here, and then you have a point, and then that's it. We'll close. Actually, there's quite a lot of people now that want to speak. Are you okay if we continue and just take this round before lunch, and then we can release you for lunch? I do want to make sure that the room has had a chance to give an opinion about the recommendations from the study as well, which is the final point which I would like to cover before we break. So what I've got then is the lady here, gentleman in the third row here, then the gentleman 2 rows behind, and then this gentleman here. Okay, and then I better close. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Clara. I come from Malawi, representing smallholder farmers, NAS Farm. I really thank you for this session, which talks about services on value chain. You've talked about the price and availability of services in SADC countries. My question is, you talked about the lack of skills in some countries, like in ICT, accounting, and engineering. Have you made any plans or strategic plans so that maybe as SADC countries we can move together? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. That was straight to the point. We've got that one. Thank you very much. Okay, gentleman in the third row now, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Dr. Salom Kihemba from Kison Group of Tanzania. Kison Group of Companies. I'm from Tanzania. And so I have a concern on the way you put forward your recommendation, particularly on the relatability of the recommendation, given the differences in policy framework and environment across the entire member state of the SADC. So how did you come across with this recommendation and make sure they are all relatable to the member states, despite the fact that each state has their differences and concerns when it comes to policy structure and environment? Thank you very much.
Yep, good question. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Thank you, the chairman, for unlocking my tongue. Well, I will give my point in Kiswahili. Ndio, mimi ninaitwa Johansen Tabura. Natokea VETA, ni technician, upande wa ufundi wa magari. Naendesha, mimi ni mwandishi wa vitabu vile vile, upande wa udhibiti wa ajali, safarini na uokoaji kiufundi. Konsani yangu hapo ni nini? Ni mwalimu, nafundisha upande wa ufundi wa magari vijana. Lakini vijana wanaojifunza ufundi wa magari ni wachache ukilinganisha na kikundi kizima kinachohusika na mambo ya usafirishaji barabarani. Elimu yao ni duni. Ni kama tuna mabomu. Madereva ni mabomu, mafundi ni mabomu kwa sababu hawakwenda shuleni, lakini japo tunawaamini watuendeshe huko barabarani. Na hii ni chanzo cha ajali nyingi barabarani. Sasa nyie SADC, barabara zetu zinaunganika, cross borders zote zinaunganika hivyo. Kama mtu hatajifunza vizuri hapa Tanzania au Zambia, akatoka Zambia hana elimu safi ya kuendesha watu barabarani, atasababisha ajali hapa Tanzania. Tanzania atasababisha ajali huko Zambia. Sasa niko na shauri kwamba kuwepo na ushirika wa pamoja ndani ya SADC unaotambua hii elimu ya vyombo vya barabarani, kwamba mtu ajikuendesha barabarani awe na sifa hizi na hizi na hizi, angalau ndani ya SADC nzima. Asanteni.
Okay, thank you much. Driving standards. Last question, please. Encore comment.
Thank you very much. My name is Adrian John, and I'm a Tanzanian. I was just wondering, with the liberalization of trade and services and access to the market in the SADC countries, what would be the long-term effect of non-SADC companies accessing services and providing services in the SADC countries through subsidiaries that are based in SADC countries? And a situation exists whereby a company, a subsidiary company, locally registered, and for all legal basis, it's a local company, but in reality, it only acts as a source of bidding for services, and once the services are obtained, the actual job is done outside the countries. And as an example, you might find, for instance, a Chinese company has an office in Tanzania, but that Tanzanian office is registered locally and is perhaps even staffed with Tanzanians. But this Tanzanian office bids for work in Zambia or Botswana, and once it gets the job, it is transferred directly to China. The work is done in China, and after that, it's transferred back to the Tanzanian office for submission. The long-term effect of that is that the local companies most likely would not be able to compete because of the services, the capacity that is lower than these other non-SADC companies. So in liberalization of trades and services, in particularly consultancy services, what would be a way of dealing with that situation? And if it's not dealt with, what would be the long-term effect to the local SADC country companies and the service providers?
Okay, thank you very much. Also an important point. I can still see two hands up. Does anybody mind if I take those two? I know I'm between you and your lunch, but let's, can I take them? I don't see any objections. The two gentlemen at the, I have to close the floor because otherwise we won't finish. The two gentlemen at the back and this gentleman here, and then that's it, 3 people. So the gentleman, yes, please go ahead, and then the gentleman behind you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mr. Kisangai from K-Kings International. The question is, as far as SADC is concerning and other bloc or regional bloc organization in Africa, are we still paving the way for the roadmap of our future? The roadmap to our future, what are the really key issues that has been perpetuated since long time as we sit basically considering the African Union mandate in all this organization? What are the real roadmap to our future? Because now we've been talking about the issue of common marketing, crossing the border, goods and services from one country to another. That has been there for so long that even it is historical. Even when we talk about the caravan trade route, considering the history of 19th century, people are still crossing the border. People are still doing business those times. But right now, considering the changes of science and technology, movement of goods and everything, what are the real key issues that are supposed to be the roadmap to our future in SADC and African in general? Because in other countries, like European Union, for instance, as we take an example, they have a very nice standard procedures to guide their organization. Do we really seriously, as African, as SADC, have those serious standard procedures for any citizen of these countries to enable to understand what actually am I supposed to benefit through this vis-a-vis trade of SADC or industries within the SADC bloc? We are now supporting, for instance, the agribusiness issue. Agribusiness in Africa, that can lead about increasing GDP of Africa. But actually, do we really have to finance, like yesterday we've been talking about DFI, the financing of all these organizations to bring about the development of SADC bloc in general. Because it's not about the zero-sum gain it was in before. It's not about South African being a giant in economy in SADC vis-a-vis Mozambique, which is not much giant in economy, but we are talking about one bloc in general and how in per se they are all gaining the share of being in that organization. So I have the honor to ask you guys, in order to the conclusion, even the heads of our states when they came here, we really need to know the verified road map to our future for the SADC. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that point. Then the gentleman behind you in the blue shirt, please. And then you last, afterwards.
Well, my question is going for you. It's most of the youth in African countries, they are faced with the same problems, like unemployment. So that how these youth people within the SADC country can gain through this integration. Because most of them, they are idle and they don't know where they can do any job. So that my question focus on that.
Thank you for that. And then finally, last one, please.
Thank you. I'm David from Tanzania, expert in regional integration from the Pan-African University, situated in Cameroon. I have one contribution, and then I'll be having one question. First, the first contribution is about public involvement for SADC and this program of chain of services around the SADC region to be beneficial. We have to focus also on general public involvement from grassroots level. For instance, we can take a good example from European Union, what's happening now about Brexit issue. This is a critical, if we want to focus on that, we probably face it in future. So that's the first thing and priority as a part of advice. Second thing, I would like to ask you, we have seen throughout your presentation that there is a big problem when it comes to negotiation about the harmonization of policy, laws, and procedures. So we need you right now to show us or to tell us what's your stand to facilitate this issue of negotiation and harmonization of policies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for all that. I'm now closing the contributions and will respond to all those points that were raised. Thank you very much for the points. I think I might try and tackle them in reverse order. I can work back through my notes to make sure that I've covered everything. But let's take that last point first. How do you approach harmonization of policies and laws? Okay, so the way that we go about this in SADC, if we're going to, we have drivers such as the treaty, the SADC treaty, the industrialization strategy that we're talking and roadmap that we're talking about here. This is also an answer to the earlier question, which covers something similar. So we have those drivers that set the framework for it, and then within that, each of the SADC Secretariat policy leads for those areas will develop a program of work that will point in that direction. So whether it's an expert on communications or transport or the internet or whether it's finance, there are various people, not many people I have to say, individuals. I mean, there's only maybe 2 people that are dealing with finance and investment, but they have the responsibility to work out proposals which are then put to the member states to see whether member states wish to embrace harmonization. So we have to get, the Secretariat has to get a lead from the member states, from the ministers, on what they're prepared to see and where they're prepared to see harmonization taking place and to what extent. Once we have a lead from the ministers on what they would like work to cover, or the heads of state, of course, have the ultimate lead. Then the policy leads within the Secretariat will develop proposals which are discussed with member states. So this has been our role, for example, in the negotiations on trade in services, because we have a view of what could be done by the member states, but ultimately it's the member states that make the decisions about what they're prepared to do. So the Secretariat is a catalyst or a facilitator, but the Secretariat doesn't impose, and this is a difference, I think, a little bit, if I can be a little bit provocative, compared to, because you raised the question about comparisons with the EU. Now, I've worked in the EU, and there the member states have given the European Commission power to make proposals which are then discussed and decided by qualified majority voting in most cases by the member states. In SADC, everything is done on a consensus basis. And so the power of the Secretariat to push through harmonization isn't there in the way that it is there in Europe. So there is a difference. But there's also a similarity. And I think in terms of the process, ultimately, in either direction, it depends upon the willingness of member states to embrace a harmonization, seeing the benefits for the region as well as for themselves, or whether the member states wish to reserve areas for national treatment without extending to other countries in the region. And that has, you know, as we've seen, can have negative consequences. It can have short-term positive benefits to the country, but in the long run, it has negatives. So that's the way that the harmonisation policy tends to work. And of course, public involvement in the process is really important. So this is why we roll out national consultations, why we support processes that meet with the member state trade officials, the line ministries, the regulators, and also business trade unions. We're prepared to see anybody that's got an opinion about this. The role, I'm going to take this, the role of youth and women, I'll take those together because I think they were both raising similar points. And how can integration help? The point is that you look at we're from the services sector, so we can't speak for the whole of the economy. We're not in the position to do that. But from our role as knowledgeable in the services sector, we can see from the employment that takes place in the service sector that women are, many women are employed in the service sector. So if you wanted to expand employment of women, you need to allow the service sector to grow, because then the job opportunities will grow alongside it. The same applies to young people. You know, if you look at I went to India to visit the IT sector. You know, the average age of people working in IT companies in India is 24. Average age is 24 when I was there about 10 years ago. Maybe it's even dropped, I don't know. But so some of the service sectors are ideal ground for the development of youth employment. On the question of access to markets by non-SADC companies, you said. Now this is quite interesting because over the last period during the negotiations we've had on trade, I can see one or two of the trade negotiators in the room. They can contradict me if I've got it wrong, but basically what happened was this trade agreement is supposed to support the region. So the beneficiaries of the preferences that the member states have given to each other through the negotiations are supposed to benefit the region and therefore benefit SADC companies. So what makes a SADC company? This has been the fundamental question that we've looked at. A SADC service supplier is defined in the Protocol on Trade in Services, but the definition wasn't considered to be adequate. So in the recent round of negotiations, we've tried to see collectively how we could improve the definition. And we've introduced into the Protocol on Trade in Services a reference to the fact that a SADC service supplier must have a real and continuous link with the economy of a SADC member state or state party, as it says in the protocol. So now you can ask the question, what on earth do you mean by real and continuous link? That's the next question, and we were asking that in the negotiations. But we got to the point in trying to define this where it was clear that different member states had different definitions for what they meant by a real and continuous link. So we weren't able to go further to harmonize that definition. But nonetheless, all the member states at least have adopted this principle that there should be a real and continuous link, and how that is defined is then left to the member states to define it. But in terms of implementation of the protocol commitments, we will need to go with each of the member states and work out what the intention is behind this principle that is now adopted at the regional level, to see how it would be implemented at the national level. And that will then, I think, assist in understanding how the benefits can be reserved for companies that are SADC service suppliers and not Chinese service suppliers. Then, well, driving standards is, I mean, it's something that we're looking at in terms of the transport policies that my colleagues that work at the SADC Secretariat that deal with transport policy, but driver's hours, driving standards, these things are all part of the transport strategy that SADC is pursuing. We know, of course, I mean, the comparison was made with Europe. Of course, there are driving standards at the European level as well. I'm not saying that SADC is going to copy what's there. Something will be developed or is being developed which is specific to the region. But we know that driving standards and driving behavior is, it can be very, very problematic. I was trying to find a diplomatic word, but let's hit the nail on the head. In some countries, driving standards are really bad. And that's why you have accidents. That's why you've got the head-on collisions that you see so many, and why you have the tragedies that you see on the roads the whole time. So one thing is about having driving standards. The next thing is about enforcing driving standards, but also you've got to make sure that people understand that the responsibility for driving standards is on the driver, on themselves. You know, if you're a poor driver, you're at risk to everybody else. So you have a responsibility as a driver to everybody else to maintain proper driving standards. It's not just down to the enforcement agencies, it's down to individuals, I think. On the recommendations, because I wanted us to look at that, but I think we're running out of time, or have run out of time. But the point about the recommendations is that they're aimed at the region. So they're generalized in order to make sure that they can be embraced by the member states. And the study has been presented to the member states, and once the study is finally validated, then we will have regional recommendations that will, and then these will be followed up, and the differences between member states will be bridged in some way through implementation at the regional level. How many more? Do you want to take the rest while I pause and just check in case we've missed anything?
Excuse me, Malcolm. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the session has gone way over time. It's 1:30 now, and it's into lunchtime, and the next session will start soon.
Yeah, thanks, Annalene.
Yeah.
Thanks, Annalene. But our session was held up quite considerably by the previous one. Thank you. Just.
Okay, I'll be extremely quick. I think Malcolm's already dealt with most of the questions. I think just 2 points I would want to pick up. I mean, the first, I think that there were a lot of comments on the contribution of services or the cost of services in agriculture. There was also a lot of very interesting observations around, or questions around, what does this all mean for smallholder agricultures, the poor, and the youth? And so I think thinking through the recommendations, that is an interesting challenge. You know, a lot of what we've focused on is how could service reform benefit industry, my suspicion is that young people and small farmers are disproportionately vulnerable to the cost of inefficient service providers, and I think the comments have reinforced that. High cost of transport, high cost of finance, high cost of data or ICT makes it very difficult for small farmers or entrepreneurs to access the formal economy. So I think maybe in terms of the recommendations, it would be interesting to specifically consider the services accessed and used by young people, small business, and small agriculture, and see whether those could be prioritized or how those could be addressed going forward. And so, thanks for that input. And the only other comment I would make is just around the very tricky question asked about the sources of service inputs and the potential for foreign companies to use local companies to front in the region and sell services elsewhere. And this is not going to be a unique SADC challenge. Companies globally nowadays can source service inputs from where they want. They don't need to work through a local-based company or subsidiary in order to access whether it's Chinese, American, or European services. That's the new reality that we're all confronted with. Government through local content rules and through its own procurement might be able to direct expenditure towards local providers, but business doesn't think that way. They're going to buy the cheapest service that they can from wherever they can. And so that is, that challenge is not something we're going to be able to get away from, and it's not something that we necessarily want to avoid. We want to make it easier for companies to access the best services that they can. What our focus has been on is how can we ensure that at least within the region, service providers from one country can operate across regional borders, that at least within the region, where there are skills in one country and a shortage in other, that those can move across borders so that we can at least create a SADC services market that is reasonably efficient and can compete globally, rather than trying to keep foreign service providers out of this particular market. And I will finish there. So from my side, thank you very much. It's been a great discussion, and I'm sorry that we've run out of time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. I'd like to say thank you for the questions. If anybody's got any points which they want to pass to us, you have opportunity while we're still here this week. We're leaving at lunchtime tomorrow. So thank you very much for all the comments, and we'll reflect that in the way that we take this forward. So enjoy your lunch. I hope you found it interesting.